Welcome to this lesson. Andre and our staff have combed through our best lectures, speeches, and presentations to bring you today's principle. As you watch these lessons, keep in mind how you might best apply the morals, wisdom, and principles in your ordinary daily activities. We know that what we practice and support with intention, we can improve on. Leadership and diversity advocacy requires that we practice both mentally and in the demonstration of our values. Take this time to reflect on your behaviors, build on your strengths, and minimize your areas of weakness. Remember, we look forward to seeing who you become. Andre and our team at AM Horizons will start you on this journey now.
Privilege and the animal farm. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but free-range chickens are much more expensive than your traditionally raised poultry, right? So your manufactured or large manufacturing farms that create these opportunities for us to have cheap eggs. And so the free-range chicken, I was at my my local co-op and was going to purchase one of those things, but they are significantly more expensive. The free-range eggs are extremely more expensive than your large manufactured chickens. And why is that? And people will give you answers that I think are very, very telling. So one set of answers was that the reason it's more expensive is because the chickens have a better quality of life. So they're able to experience the sunshine. They live in open spaces, better neighborhoods, if you will, and they get better treatment as a result of living in those better neighborhoods, and they have a general overall healthier outcome. I also heard that they're more expensive because people have to chase them to bring them to market, right? So that's the existence of the free range chicken. The existence of the largely manufactured industrial raised chicken is somewhat different. There are lots of chickens, you know, in tight areas, and because there are so many of those chickens, they have to be mindful of cannibalization. So chickens will cannibalize each other. They will eat each other, or they will kill each other, particularly if their quarters are too cramped. And so there's monitoring of those environments that have to be done. And because they're in such close proximity, there's lots of filth in those environments. There's also a need for antibiotics. So there are drugs in those communities, right? So we have filth and crime, murder. We have drugs in those communities, but we're able to produce chickens at a much at an economy of scale that makes them able to be purchased by everyday people. And so when we start to think about that, yes, we can pay more for chickens. And I would suggest that given the free-range chickens' position in this particular story, that they are the group with privilege, and that the industrial raised chickens are in a position where they do not have as much privilege as the free range chickens. But in both cases, what we fail to realize is that both of those chickens, whether they have privilege or they don't have privilege, are participating in a system where they both will be fed as dinner. They'll be dinner. So whether you have privilege or you don't have privilege, if you're a part of the system, or you're a part of the game, if you will, if you're in the farming agronomy system, you may think that you're advancing, but you will be served up just like the rest of us. Privilege and the chicken. The animal farm.
Wow. Sorry for the interruption. I needed a break. Andre was challenging some of my basic assumptions. While I get myself together, check this out.
So here are some additional barriers to our humanity. This idea of optical illusions, that there are biological or sociological differences between humans that create obstacles for authentic human relations. And I would say that those are optical illusions, that they are made up things that create artificial barriers between us as we seek and strive to relate to other people. I would also say that there's this idea of technology, and I get this from Dr. Mahmoud El-Kate, that there are ways in which we are tricked into giving up our humanity or not honoring others' humanity, and those tricks come in the form of racial or racial designations, as well as socioeconomic status, maybe gender roles. Those oftentimes can be tricks to trick us out of our humanity or trick us into not seeing other people as humans. The other thing is this idea or concept of dehumanizing. The funny thing is that you can never be less than human. You were born human. People can treat you less than human, or you can oftentimes act for a period of time less than human, but you can never be less than human, because the DNA that brought you into existence is the same DNA that courses through your veins every day of your existence. The concept of race is one of these barriers to humanity, because it turns people from authentic beings into artificial things. And we give those things titles, right? So a black person, a white person, a thug, if you will. And so we turn people from authentic entities into artificial things. Gender roles and poverty, and the thing that I think is very interesting about this idea of gender roles is that it changes from society to society depending on the context and what people what folks need, what people and cultures need. This idea of poverty is also interesting because we spend time talking about the people in poverty, but we don't spend enough time, or we're not as articulate as we could be in talking about how do we undo the systems that create the environments where people in poverty live. And so these are all tricks to our humanities, they're barrier to our humanities, and they're designed to break down and subdivide the human soul.
It's a great day, I'm feeling good. Oh, the possibilities of what I could do with the world at my fingertips. My imagination brings a smile up to my lips. Oh, fascinated, I'm moving fast. Oh, I'm optimistic as the days go past. Oh, opportunity is here for me, so come along and take a look, because I want you to see. The world is yours, look a little bit closer. If you want it, come and get it. You can take it over, you can make your tomorrows what you want them to be. You got the power in your hands to shape your history. You gotta take it up a level and go up higher. Pour more fuel in the tank and turn up the fire. Come on and take a leap into your destiny. And come on up, come up with me. We're going up, 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 and up, up, up. We're going up, 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 and up, up, up. We're going up, 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 and up, up, up. We're going up, up, up.
Does your profession require continuing education? Tired of overpaying for less than great seminars? Are you ready for education on your terms? It might be time to enroll at organizationallift.org, the key source for continuing education credits, ethics, and elimination of bias credits. Each of our courses will contain a clear syllabus, readings, media, games, and exam questions. High standards. You'll be required to pass the course at 90% or better. At the end of the course, you'll be awarded with a certificate that will serve as course documentation. Courses range from $125 for one session course to $350 for a multi-session course. Andre Koen is the Chief Facilitator for organizationallift.org. and as such, he provides 24 hours availability to courses focused on developing cross-cultural competence, effective conflict mitigation, and practical methods for increasing discretionary effort. So join us at Organizational Lift and experience what higher learning should be. Organizationallift.org.
So race is a construct designed, built, and carried out by governments. And each government talks about, deals with, and identifies race differently based on the context by which they're operating. Communist countries look at race differently than socialist countries. Socialist countries look at it differently than representative democracies. And so when we talk about this idea of race, we have to recognize that it is organized to the benefit of the governmental structures by which people are being organized to live. The key question that we should be asking is, organized for what? What is the end goal of these racial categorizations? And the only suggestion I would have is to follow the money. That's just a teaser. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. Theories are great, but if nobody understands what you're talking about, if nobody understands what you're talking about, then who looks foolish? Diversity elegance is making sure that we have conversations in ways that people can join us in the conversations to actually make change in their lives and in the people that they care about. If we've produced a process that is so cumbersome that we don't know what to call people, how to call people, or when to call people, then we have to look at that. We have to look at that particular system and ask if it's benefiting us. And so when we talk about a new paradigm, a new way to think about diversity, I'd like to add into the mix this idea that we need diversity elegance, taking sophisticated ways of thinking and doing and interacting and making it simple. So how do we make it simple? We can start with things like the golden rule. We can start with conversations around what do you need versus I know what you need. How do we engage people in conversations? When we start talking about those types of things, then we start getting into this idea of diversity elegance. I can have a vocabulary that can fill volumes and volumes of books, but if I cannot communicate in a way that the people who need me to communicate or the people I'm communicating with can't understand me, then my fancy lexicon does me no good. Diversity elegance. As far as I'm concerned, the iDevices and the Android devices are magic. As far as I'm concerned, it's magic. I don't know how they work. I don't know why they work. I just know that they work. Now, I will tell you that I was really surprised, though, because I have a master's in education and learning technology, how to use technology to learn, teach, and grow. But when my niece grabbed my iPad for the first time and started looking for her favorite app, I was dumbfounded. here's this device that as an adult I feel very accomplished using because I have advanced degrees and I understand the ramifications of how to use technology and the profundity of the ability to use technology. And here's this 16-month, 18-month-old little girl just zipping around. I look at ballet dancers and they make it seem so simple. But have you ever tried a ballet workout? So when we talk about this idea of diversity elegance, what we're talking about is how do we take, and one might argue that intelligence or wisdom is taking complex systems and making them applicable in very simplistic ways. And I think that's what Apple has done very well. I think the Android devices have done this very well, that they have taken these complex systems and made them very much user-friendly. And so when we talk about this idea of diversity elegance, how do we take sophisticated ideas but make them palatable enough that everyday people can use them? Things like internalized oppression or white privilege are great terms to use, but they're not very user-friendly to common folk. See, that there are ways in which my doctor talks to other doctors about medicine. And then there are ways that that same doctor talks to me about medicine and about the things that I need to do. And he talks about them in very different ways. And so when we talk about this idea of diversity elegance, we need to be elegant in how we talk about diversity so that people can come join us in the conversation and not be thwarted by the conversation before we even get started. So what do you want? What do you want? I would submit to you that ultimately we're all looking for safety, significance, and belonging, and that it is our behaviors that sometimes get us into trouble, that get us into conflict with other human beings, that we've created these cultures, these methods of adapting to the context that can sometimes be problematic, particularly when they're not helping us reach our goals. And so we are all goal-oriented. We're all looking for something. We're all striving for something. And so when we think about safety, significance, and belonging, that provides us an opportunity to look at the universality of the human experience and the human goals and actually try to work together to make sure that we all achieve and reach our individual goals. And so when we think about what it is that we want, we have to recognize that what the other person wants is very similar to what I want. However, our methods for getting those things may be very different, particularly given the context by which we have come to know each other, come to relate to one another, and interact with one another.
There is dignity and honor in being human. Oftentimes when we talk about diversity, we often talk about it in very esoteric ways. We talk about it in very emotional ways. But typically we never talk about what is the core and the root of what we currently call diversity. So what is dignity? Dignity implies that there is a self-pride as well as a pride that is exuded and offered to other people. So as a part of diversity, there is dignity. There is also honor. Oftentimes, people confuse honor with respect. But honor is respecting at a very high level. Dignity, honor, and respect. There is dignity and honor in being human. What does it mean to be? None of us have done anything to be here on this planet. So we're not more worthy or less worthy than anyone else. We're just here to learn about how to be humans. And lastly, there is dignity and honor in being human. What does it mean to be human? Well, if we look up in the dictionary, we find something very interesting, that there are two definitions for the word human. One being the noun, having thumbs, having a big brain, and walking on two legs, human. But there's also the adjective of being human that describes how we should exist, the things we should do, the ways in which we should interact with each other. There is dignity and honor in being human.
So, the loss of humanity, or grieving the loss of humanity. So, this past summer, there were a number of shootings of unarmed black men. There were lots of demonstrations as opposing those killings of not only black men but black children as well. And I found myself really feeling tormented about those things, feeling sadness and anger and depression, and I could not figure it out until I started looking at some work I was doing on another project around depression. And I was looking at depression, and then it hit me that a large part of what I was feeling, was natural. It was a natural feeling for me to have, given the circumstances around those world events. But I also realized that I was going through the stages of grief. And in some ways, I was further along in some of those stages than some of my other friends who had just engaged in this idea of grief. And it was very frustrating for me to be further along in this grief process and then to see other folks who are just beginning the grief process because I had already passed that particular stage. And so when I came to this understanding of the loss and the grief that I was feeling, I then asked the question, well, what am I grieving? Because what's happening? And one of the things that came to me was that I was experiencing the loss, I was experiencing grief because my humanity was under attack. And when the humanity of one is diminished, the humanity of all of us is diminished. And so, in an effort to try to figure out how I could obtain some healing, I started looking at this idea that we are all experiencing some grief and loss around our humanity. And so we'll spend some time now talking about how do you deal with that, and then what do you need to do to help clients and coworkers deal with the assaults that we are having on our humanity. So when we look at these geometric shapes, I like to use geometric shapes in presenting this particular point. When we talk about diversity, and I use squares, three different squares, three different circles, and three different triangles, all having some similar features, but also having some very different features. And so when we talk about this idea of diversity, what we're really talking about is this balance of what the law says in terms of who needs to be at the table, but we're also talking about the balance of differences and similarities between individuals, because both of those are extremely important. Oftentimes in trainings, we focus on one or the other. but it is the combination of those two things that actually makes our work more effective as we try to engage in better people's lives through helping them to make better decisions about their lives. And so this idea of diversity is a balance between what is the same about us and what is different, and recognizing both of those as being important parts of the human experience. So equity is this idea of getting people what they need and not just giving them what you have to offer. A couple of examples of equity. One is there's a baseball stadium here in town where most stadiums have a 1-to-1 ratio of women's restrooms and men's restrooms. And we know that women and men use restrooms differently. But this particular baseball stadium has a 2-to-1 ratio. For every one restroom dedicated to men, there are 2 dedicated to women. And so the user experience for all involved is a lot better. And so when we talk about this idea of equity, that's important. Another way to think about equity is that equality is giving everyone shoes, and equity is giving everyone shoes that fit them. So those are some important ways to think about this idea of equity. When we talk about equality, we're talking about fairness. And you'll hear people use those types of words, fair, what is fair? And when we talk about equality, the nature of equity is that it will not be fair, but it will give people what they need. And so given those two concepts, as we work in our organizations, we need to ask ourselves, are we working for equality, or are we actually working for equity and making sure that people get what they need in a way that they need it?
I've had this problem.
Big problem.
I really needed
A good school.
and I kept searching and searching.
There are so many choices.
It's really hard to find one that has all the things on my list.
But I finally did it.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
If you are looking for one as well,
Look no further.
Here's a really good one.
Just use mine.
Use mine.
I'm very satisfied.
Definitely recommend. Problem gone.
There is a monster searching for a soul. Now, when I say that there are lots of places that people can go, and there are lots of places I could go with those statements, but what I'd like to really focus on is this idea that the human soul is made up of 2 things. It's the body and it's the spirit, and that the spirit is the animating force for the body, and without the body, the spirit has no place to live, and without the spirit, the body has no animation. Right? And when these breaches occur between the body and the spirit, when the soul is broken, what we have is a void. And there's a monster that is waiting for that void. And one of those monsters, and we'll just talk about one of them, is this idea that one of the monsters is free market capitalism. What capitalism says, or free market capitalism, or maybe more appropriately, predatory capitalism, what it says is that you are not complete unless you've purchased our product. You're not whole. You're not fully human unless you have participated or taken our products upon you for a price. Very much like the Onceler in the epic story of Dr. Seuss's Starbelly Sneetches, right? So the Onceler was able to make people happy by granting them what they wanted through his Onceler machine, providing them a resource at a cost. And so what I would suggest is that we've had avatars that have taught us that you cannot accumulate enough stuff When I think about Philip Seymour Hoffman, Janis Joplin, Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, and what are the individuals that hurt the most for me? Robin Williams. They have taught us that you can have everything, but if you haven't filled the void in your soul, you still can come up wanting and hurting. And so when we think about the human soul, how do we make that connection? How do we reunite that? We have to love people. We have to care for people to help remind them of their humanity. And that's how we begin the process of healing the soul. I believe that President Ronald Reagan identified this as in a pretty profound way, that as human beings, we are much more alike than we are different. And that the differences that we see could be perceived as, and I'm paraphrasing, obstacle illusions, artificial barriers to authentic human relations. And so ultimately, what that suggests is that there is no born prejudice, and there is no born conflict between human beings. That human beings learn these conflicts, learn how to be the way that they are in ways that are not natural for our species. And so then what becomes the root of conflict? I believe that we all have the same core motivations, that we're looking for safety, significance, and belonging. But there are methods that get in the way of that idea of safety, significance, and belonging. That it is our efforts to achieve those things that have developed, where we have developed differing methods, that we will call those methods culture, that have actually gotten in our way oftentimes of having authentic human relations with other human beings. And so when President Reagan talks about aliens coming to the planet to greet us, and we seeing our commonalities, I would say, aren't there aliens already? As we oftentimes identify people who are not from our nation states as aliens. And so do those people not show us how much more alike than we are different? And then what do we do once we've encountered those aliens? Do we continue to propagate the same propaganda that has driven us apart, or do we show them how we unite as human beings and include them into our families, both metaphorically as well as a part of our communities?